Okay, for our next walkthrough, we're going to look at adding a new raw material. So you can see from my file, I've already got an example file opened up. It's formulas SJC, and I'm going to add my new raw material. So we're going to click raw material, and we'll see a list of the 13 raw materials that I've previously added. And I want to add a new one. And so we're going to add a new ingredient. We're going to call it Ecuadorian nibs, and we'll make up a supplier. So it's from Supply Co. And we are paying $8.34 a pound for these nibs. Now we'll talk about bean to nib conversion and processes that might encompass that in a later video. But if you, in the settings video, if you had chosen the metric configuration, this would then be cost per kilogram, for example. Ingredient statement settings. And so this is going to be what do we need it to say on our ingredient specification, right? So what's our legally required disclosure for our ingredients? In the United States, this is going to be chocolate liquor. So a nib, even though we're starting with a nib, we're starting with a bean, by the time we grind that, a ground nib is simply a chocolate liquor, and that is what the United States Code of Federal Regulations requires us to disclose it at on our ingredient statement. This grouping name we're going to skip for now. That's something that's a little bit more advanced that isn't going to be relevant for most of you. And now we're going to enter in our nutritional data. So for this one, I just happen to know that its calories are 665, and we're always going to want to do it per 100 grams. The fat is 54%, the saturated fat is 34. There's no trans, no cholesterol. There's going to be a little bit of sodium. It's about 27.5 grams of carbs with 14 grams of fiber. No sugar to speak of. There's no added sugar. There's going to be some protein and a little bit of calcium. And that is the profile of an Ecuadorian bean, an Ecuadorian nib from my process. Now, from a regulatory perspective, because Atlas Pro handles regulatory assessments very robustly, we need to tell Atlas a little bit more about what this ingredient is. And so it's first going to ask us, is this a pure fat? And if so, what kind of fat is it? No, it's not a cocoa butter, and it's not a vegetable fat. So we're going to discard that. Is it a chocolate component? We're going to click liquor. I'll probably update this to say liquor or nib, because for many of you, you're going to make a distinction between a liquor or a nib. From a regulatory standpoint, again, the FDA does not care if you're starting with a nib or a liquor, which is just a nib that's been ground up. From their perspective, it's a liquor. So we're going to click liquor, and we saw it turn green. That's how we know that we've told Atlas what this is for a chocolate component. It's not a cocoa powder. It hasn't been alkalized. It's not a dairy. It's not a sweetener. It's not a flavor. It's not an emulsifier, and it's not a color. And so at this point, we are done configuring our raw material. We've told Atlas everything that it needs to know about this raw material to do what it needs to do. There's one more thing that we can do, is we can add an attachment. And so I'm going to add an attachment here. I'm going to go to my desktop, and I've got an example document that I just said is in my example nib specification. So if I click that, it has attached it directly to this raw material. This is very helpful if I'm handling multiple raw materials or price quotes. I can put my specifications here. I can put, if I'm getting documentation from my supplier that is their technical data sheet or their nutritional, or I've got a quote from a vendor that says this is your pricing, I can attach all of that here. You can attach as many documents to this raw material as you need. Again, it just helps me keep everything really, really organized with the raw material that it is appropriate for. Last thing we need to do then is save our changes. So it's going to tell me to go ahead and save it. I'm going to hit the click save button. It's going to ask me, where do I want to save this? And it's going to default to a formulas name. You can call it anything that you want, but I always use formula. So I'm going to go to where I've been storing these in my test files, and I'm going to click that and then It's going to ask me, are you sure this file is already there? Do you really want to overwrite it? And I'm going to say yes. At that point, we can see that our raw material count has gone from 13 to 14. And if I go back up here and look, I can see that my nib is right there. These little icons here are telling me that the paperclip is telling me that there's an attachment on this raw material. Right, so if I scroll down, we can see that there is indeed an attachment. And this little green tag is telling me that we have tagged it as a regulatory configuration, that regulatory configuration is complete. If I delete this text box up here where I type nib to narrow it down, we can see all of the things that I've got in here. Everything has been set up from a regulatory standpoint, but I can quickly assess the profile of all my raw materials to see if they've been configured or not. And we can see that I've only, in this example, in this file, I've only got one raw material that has an attachment on it. So guys, that is the 30,000 foot overview as to what this raw material section is and how to use it to configure a new raw material.